we are in the post-COVID kind of recovery phase. What would you expect wages growth to be at the moment?
Well, the Reserve Bank says that it's got to be over 3 in order for the economy to remain healthy. But as we know, it's nowhere near that, not even half that at the moment. And that's a huge problem. It's a problem because we're depending on consumer spending, and that's working people, the grassroots, having money to spend in their local businesses. And if wages continue to be this low, it's going to jeopardise not just the recovery but sort of the ongoing health of our economy.
How do you get wages to go up without doing it artificially?
Well, there's a couple of things that the government absolutely needs to do, and it's sort of the opposite of their current policy. They're an employer themselves, and not just a small employer, the largest employer in the country. At the moment, they're suppressing wages for their own staff. That sends a signal to all other employers to do that too. Secondly, the minimum wage case is happening at the moment. The government could support wage rises for our frontline essential workers. They're people on the lowest wages in our country. We know they spend all of that money. And finally, we can do something, government can do something about high levels of casualisation. 60% of the jobs that have been created since the recovery have been casual jobs.
Do you think that taxpayer-funded wage rises for the public service would be a good political move, though, at this point?
I think that it's important for public sector wages to rise for 2 reasons. First of all, it sends a signal to other employers. Obviously, other employers compete with the public sector for good staff. So if they raise their wages, it sends a signal to those employers. So that would help the economy. Secondly, public sector workers, like all other workers, when they receive those pay rises, what do they do with it? They go spend it in their local restaurants, in their local cafes. They go buy things at the retail stores, so it all circulates back in the economy. So it's the very best you can do in terms of stimulating small and local businesses.
It would be quite a risk for any government of any stripe, wouldn't it, to give a public sector pay rise? And I agree with you, it is a signal to other employers, but if there's a lag time, that would be horrific for any political party. That wouldn't go down well with the public. So what would that gap be, do you expect?
Well, it just used to be normal. Just used to be normal to give fair pay rises to the public sector. It's actually not normal at the moment. Well, the government had this, what I think is quite a crazy idea, and I don't think they've honestly thought it through, of saying, well, public sector pay rises will only be in line with whatever happens in the private sector. Well, we know in the private sector it's less ability for those employees to push for wage rises, so we're not seeing wage increases there. So they're sort of like given an artificial ceiling to what they're going to do. And it's like a big lever they've got to make a difference, and choosing not to use that lever, I think in the end isn't good for the economy.
Look, wage growth has been slow for about a decade now. It wasn't just this government, it wasn't just COVID. So do the problems and the mistakes go back more than a decade, do you think?
Well, it's actually 8 years now of record low wage growth, and before then we never saw a situation where wages were as low as they are now. It used to be quite normal to have regular pay increases above 2.5%, above 3% and more right across the economy, including the minimum wage. So I think what's happened is there's actually been a change of policy, a deliberate thought that it's a good idea to suppress wages. And I'm worried, but it's not just me as a Reserve Bank Governor, that this is now causing a problem, and especially because we've got our borders closed, and because of that it means that the way we keep the economy growing is domestic spending and domestic confidence, consumer confidence. So I think government needs to be pulling the levers now to change that policy.
Yeah, look, we see record low interest rates, we see inflation not moving at all, but what we're hearing is that businesses is actually seeing inflation in its supply chain, but it has not yet made its way through to the consumer. So, i.e., the cost of doing business is getting more expensive. Do you have sympathy for that argument?
Well, it's the workers really know that because their bills are going up. It's not like their bills have been frozen along with their wages. All those costs are starting to go up, but you know, you look at what's happened to private health cover, you look at what's happened for childcare, you look at what's happened for your utility bills, like none of those are frozen. Like if they all were, then you know, people wouldn't be feeling the pressure, but unfortunately every year that goes by and people don't get pay rises and their bills go up, their living standards are going backwards.
What is the situation at the moment, Sally McManus? I mean, we can be pretty pessimistic when you look at the data and you look at, you know, the cost of housing at the moment, you look at the wage growth being really slow, but we're being told it's still pretty good out there compared to the rest of the world. Do you agree with that? It's pretty positive, pretty good to be living in Australia.
Oh yeah, look, in terms of the coronavirus, thank God we live in Australia, and that hasn't been luck. It's been because we as a people have decided to put the health of our people first, and that was a decision that happened over a year ago now, and if we hadn't have done that, we would have been like the US or like Europe or the rest of the world, and what a tragedy. And that's because we listened to the experts, and we all stuck together and complied with the government, with the health experts about what they said. So we should all congratulate ourselves for that, but we can't just rest on our laurels and think, well, we managed to do that, everything else is going to be fine. It's not going to be fine unless we make it fine. And we see, as you said, things bouncing back in terms of profit growth. Yep. But if we don't see a V-shaped recovery with wages growth, that's going to be the problem.
Okay, one final question, because we are getting pretty close to budget day. That is next Tuesday. What will you be looking for in the budget? The Treasurer has flagged that there is a skills gap now, a workforce shortage, because we don't have any immigrants coming into the country. How do you fill that skills gap without overseas migration?
Well, two things. That's also tied up in the topic we've been talking about, and that's low wage growth. There's one way, like supply and demand. If you also increase wages, people are more likely to want to do jobs. But there is also, as you point out, a skills gap in skilled workers because we've got our borders closed and we're going to continue to do so. So I think it's a really good time for us to take a pause as a country and say, well, while we've got no choice with the borders closed, what type of immigration policy do we want? Do we want one that's more focused towards permanent migration? Should we be investing in our young people in terms of training them up? Should we have a different type of system that lets in workers we really need, but make sure that we don't have people coming in where, unfortunately, they get exploited, and that drives wages down as well?
Okay, Sally McManus, I'll see you next week, no doubt. Thanks so much.
See you then.